Hi, everybody. This is Randy Martinez from IT Pros Management. We've got on our show today, Relax IT is covered. We have Josep Najarian from Easy DMARC. Easy DMARC is a leading company in email deliverability, DMARC solutions, DKIM. So anything dealing with email records, Easy DMARC is the company to go to. Josep is the manager of deployment services at Easy DMARC and has been with the company for 5 years. He works primarily in infrastructure, enterprise level, insurance compliance, and email authentication standards. Josep, thank you for coming on the show. Welcome. How are you, sir?
Glad to be here. I'm good.
Yeah. Great. Great to hear. So we're going to jump right into this because basically I've got a lot of questions in my mind that I want to ask, and I want to kind of get through as many of those as we can during the show. The first kind of question is, let's start very simple. What is DMARC and why should businesses, really, and business leaders care about this?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question. DMARC is an email security or authentication protocol. So what DMARC does is, and I want to keep this a little bit on a high or like a global level, right?
Yeah, appreciate it.
When you send an email, you kind of have to input, you need to have an address, right? A from address, like who you're sending from. So what DMARC does is it works on that layer, right? So the thing with SMTP or emails in general is nothing is protected. Originally, when it was founded, nothing was based on security. So everything is possible with SMTP, almost everything. So when I actually send out an email, I can input whatever I want in the from address field. If I'm controlling that specific server, let's say I'm not using a platform, I have access to that specific server. I can do whatever. I can pretend to be from Easy DMARC. I can pretend to be from anything that I can imagine. And so by that, what happened is a lot of phishing attacks, spoofing attacks emerged from those vulnerabilities that SMTP, the protocol itself, had back in the day. So what DMARC does here is it works on that layer, on that from address layer. Any from address that you input, you're going to have to input a domain, right? So if you do, let's say google.com, let's say you send an email out of it. Now, what DMARC tells the servers on the recipient side when an email is sent and received by someone, it tells the server to check for authentications on that email. And those authentications are going to be SPF and DKIM, which we'll explain a little bit on later. So it checks the server for the authentications, and then based on those, it enforces a policy. Again, on a global level, what DMARC is doing is it's doing the checks to see if this email came from a legitimate sender. And by legitimate sender, I mean if google.com is authorizing that specific sender to send emails from that platform, let's say, using that address, that IP, everything that goes along with it. So it's checking if it's authorized. If it is, it's letting it through. If it is not, then it's looking at your DMARC policy. If you have enforced DMARC on your domain, it is either rejecting the email completely, as in the end recipient will not be notified about that email at all, which is the highest level of DMARC policy. You also have the option to do quarantine, which tells the server to quarantine or trap that email in the spam or the junk of the recipient. There's actually 3 policies, but those 2 are the enforced policies. The first initial policy is none, which does nothing. It's just based on reporting. That's what we kind of should start with, to get the reports in, look through everything, and then decide what needs to be configured or authorized on a global level in terms of senders.
Great. Thanks for that explanation, because that really drives to the heart of what DMARC is. It's basically that check system for emails coming in. And like you said, nowadays we're getting a lot of emails coming in that, are being manipulated from the from sender, and you don't know who's it from, is it legitimate or not? And DMARC is that system that has been put into place to basically catch that. So I appreciate that high level explanation, that global explanation that you asked, because I think that's something that's caused a lot of businesses, organizations not to implement DMARC, is really not knowing what it does. So I really appreciate that. Kind of my next question is looking at the entire email kind of system or structure, how can poor email configuration actually damage a company's, sending ability or reputation?
Yeah, that's also a very good question because, I mean, even if you don't have, let's say, DMARC, let's forget about DMARC for a minute. The older protocols would be SPF and DKIM. And if you don't have those properly configured, if there's something wrong with it, that also affects your domain reputation, deliverability in general. This wasn't the case back in, let's say, a couple of years ago, because these protocols were based only on security and integrity, let's say, when it comes to DKIM. But nowadays, so Google and Yahoo did this thing where they changed the requirements for senders, bulk senders specifically, and they started requiring these protocols to be authenticated, configured as properly as they should, as a sender, as a bulk sender. So what happens is if you don't have those, at least those configured properly, it's going to affect your reputation, it's going to affect your deliverability. But if you don't have things fully configured, let's say you don't have DMARC, you don't have anything enforced or secured, that's a risk, right? If you are running a large email infrastructure, a reputable company, and if you're not paying attention to these things, it only takes a single incident to wreck the whole thing, bring your whole reputation down. I don't know, this specific organization went through this, phishing attacks, this and that, and everyone starts questioning what are the IT teams doing there? Isn't this their job, right? So to be specific, it affects reputation, it affects deliverability, a lot of things. But most importantly, I would say security is going to be the number one thing, in my opinion.
Yeah, for people like you and I who are in kind of the IT field and we managed email systems, we manage email systems for multiple people, multiple organizations in our company. I know you do from the easy DMARC standpoint, but from a business standpoint, just from an operational standpoint, that reputation and deliverability of your emails without these properly configured records, it sounds like, they're pretty much dead in the water as far as any communication going outbound, and marketing or sales or just basic email communications just out the window without these records being properly configured, and that reputation gets damaged. And I know, it's really hard to kind of get that reputation back once you've taken a hit.
Very hard, yes.
Yes. Well, great, because I think you kind of led into my next question is basically, what are the key records that need to be configured for proper email deliverability? And can you break down like DMARC, SPF, DKIM in a simple way for our audience to kind of understand what those three primary records that we've been talking about?
Yeah, sure. So let's get into that. So mainly, first of all, what you want to shift to focus on is the server that you're sending, right? The server, the SMTP server that you're sending from needs something that is called a PTR record in the DNS zone. And that's kind of like naming a server. In my opinion, it's very similar to like owning a dog and you're putting a leash on it, right? So go with you. Specifically for like large organizations, let's say if they purchase dedicated SMTP servers from providers, let's say in this case SendGrid, they want to name it after their domain, which helps with deliverability because not thousands of companies are not sending emails to the same server. It's not a shared pool per se. So I would say that's the initial thing that you're going to need. That's like the biggest red flag for mailbox providers, let's say. If you're sending from an IP address without the PTR record, it's not a good look. So that will be the biggest red flag in terms of deliverability. So in terms of security and also deliverability nowadays, you mentioned SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. So that's correct. You also need those. Just to talk a little bit about those. What SPF is, again, on a global level, is a DNS record that you add IP addresses to it, and you're kind of saying to the recipient server that this is my safe list when it comes to IP addresses, SMTP IP addresses. If you get an email that was sent from an IP address that you cannot find in this list, then that's how like SPF works. It's not very technical, but on a global level, that's how it works. DKIM, on the other hand, is not related to server or IP authentication. It's more like content, let's say, a message integrity. So what it does is when an email is sent, it uses keys to generate this unique signature when the email is sent. And then when the email is received, it kind of does the same thing. It checks if the email that was sent and received did generate the same, let's say, hash or signature, that means the email was not altered throughout the hops or the journey, let's say, from server to server to server until it got delivered. It's kind of like a stamp, having like a stamp on a mail. That's what I compare DKIM to an email. And that nowadays, that plays a much bigger role in terms of deliverability. A lot of platforms, mailbox providers out there are basing their whole algorithms and stuff like that when it comes to reputation and deliverability with DKIM, because there's a lot of things that go with that they can use that is helpful for them to judge if your email is good or bad. And then lastly, we talked about DMARC. Again, DMARC is like the full circle. It brings everything in a full circle. It uses SPF and DKIM, and it enforces a policy. So if you're sending from a domain that has DMARC policy enforced, is passing both SPF and DKIM, and you're using servers that have PTR records set up, this is not the full picture, obviously, but these records are technically what you need to set up to have a good domain authentication and eventually a good reputation.
Right. So it sounds like when we're talking about an email setup for an organization, obviously these three records are critical to that deliverability, like you mentioned, as well as establishing that good reputation out in the wonderful world of the internet so that we can understand that the emails coming in are secure, they're coming from a proper IP address, and then the policies, like you mentioned for DMARC, tells it what to do. If it does pass all the checks, it gets delivered like normal. If it doesn't meet all those checks, then it could end up in email limbo or just get outright rejected. But I understand that all these policies and these different protocols are in place for a reason. And I want our audience to understand that really the purpose of this is to enforce proper email security, since email is kind of that massive gateway, like you mentioned, to get into different environments. So we want to make sure that we are putting a check into those things. Great explanation for these records. I really appreciate that, because that's something that I know even when I first started trying to figure out DMARC and SPF and DKIM several years ago, I had a hard time wrapping my head around it. But your explanation, if I would have had that then, I would have been far ahead of the game by then. I want to kind of trip into the next area. It's basically, we're talking about, all these different types of records that we have, but I want to understand how these different records help with, and we hear a lot about phishing and spoofing. So how does DMARC help prevent threats from reaching our customers?
By working with that from address. So let me give you an example of how it specifically works. Someone, let's say, is trying to send a phishing email from your domain. What's the first thing that they're going to do? They're going to modify the from address to pretend that they're sending from your domain. Let's say in this case, easydmark.com. So someone out there, somewhere in the world, sends an email, pretends to be from easydmark.com, and let's say they send it internally to our own employees. They hit send, the email is sent. On the receiving side though, so receiving side meaning what we use to send emails out and get them inbound. Well, we use Google. So those emails are going to be received on Google servers. And this goes for the same for Microsoft, Yahoo, and every major mailbox provider out there. It is a little bit different with Microsoft. You kind of have to do some manual things if you're an old customer, but generally it's the same thing. It should be on by default. So the email, that specific server gets the email. In our case, it's Google. So the first thing that Google is going to do is going to check the from address. It's going to check the domain portion of it. It's going to see easydmark.com. And then it's going to do a DNS lookup. And it's going to try to find a DMARC record if there is one. So we have a DMARC record, and obviously the policy is reject. So what happens is that server will get the record, the policy is reject. Now, based on the authentications that email had, it's going to determine if it should be delivered or dropped completely, rejected, sent back. So now we go into the authentications. The first thing that it's going to check is the SPF. So there's another from address field in an email header. It's called the mail from or the return path address. It's going to look up that address completely and then pick up the domain part of it. And it's going to perform an SPF record lookup now to see if that specific server is safe listed in that SPF record. So the sender, the bad actor, let's say, they have two options here. They can either input a different domain that they control, let's say their own domain. And what they can do with that is the server will look up the SPF record that belongs to their domain, and it's their IP, so it's going to be there. So technically, it's going to pass SPF authentication. But in that case, DMARC adds this new rule where it says these fields needs to align. So the from address that I explained initially and the mail from address, the domain portions of them, they need to align, as in they need to be easydmarc.com. Yes, you can use subdomains, but at the end of it, the domain itself needs to be the same, exactly the same, easydmarc.com. .org does not work. .com, that works. That's what's called an alignment. And DMARC requires this from both SPF and DKIM. So SPF, they need to align mail from and from address, and then they need to also pass the authentication, which is the IP checks. If one of them is failing, then for DMARC, that's an SPF failure. And in this case, the sender, the bad actor, cannot modify it so that both of them are passing. They either need to pick their own domain, pass authentication, but fail alignment, or they can do they can input easydmarc.com. But in that case, we're not safe listing his server, so it's failing the authentication. So SPF is out of the picture. Now the server will check for DKIM. DKIM is generally, you can think of it as the same possibility. They can have their own domain do the signature verification, but in that case, DMARC will also say that this is not aligning. So DKIM has its own domain tag in an email header. So the same thing, same way, it's either going to fail alignment or it's either going to fail authentication if it's not coming from an authorized source. So in any scenario here, that email is not going to pass DMARC. Whatever, or unless that bad actor gets access to your DNS zone, they're not going to be able to pass the email authentication in that. Eventually, DMARC is set to reject for easydmarc.com. That email will be dropped. Phishing attacks, spoofing attacks, anything outside of the authorized sender list that you have in your organization is going to be dropped. So that's you securing yourself, your own employees, right? Because your own employees are also vulnerable to these attacks. Emails that are pretending to be from the same address as they are using, easydmarc.com in this case. Or the second case is your recipients, right? We send a lot of emails around to our customers. We don't want outsiders to send emails to our recipients as well. So we want everything to be clean, authorized, hence the whole idea of introducing the deliverability scope into DMARC, DKIM, and SPF. So that's the relation that you have. And that's basically how DMARC stops the phishing and spoofing and any outside attacks from your domain.
Yeah, so it sounds like not only are these records important for email deliverability, obviously making sure your email gets from point A to point B correctly, but it's obviously a crucial component of any cybersecurity program, because now you're actually blocking one of the biggest ways people get into networks and environments and businesses and nonprofits is through email. So for folks that are kind of listening to this and going, well, it's not important, I don't care about my emails, but you got to care about your security. So either way, DMARC, DKIM, SPF records all put together make a very strong, secure barricade for emails coming in that may be malicious and with bad actors. I love your explanation of it. I appreciate the detail of it, because I think that's something that most people that understand emails really don't take into account, is that security component of it. Kind of my next one is, when people are setting up email systems, based on your experience, what is kind of the big error that you see people doing when they're setting up emails? So it's maybe like the top two errors that you go, oh my God, these guys are doing it way wrong when it comes to kind of email deliverability and these different records.
Yeah, a lot of the common mistakes that I see is they don't do background checks on the platforms that they will be using. Let's say marketing wants to use a specific platform. They don't do a background check if that platform supports modern email authentication protocols. So by the time that they grow as a company, let's say, grow a sender list and reach that point where that is needed, it's either that or like you can't send emails, that platform comes back with, well, we don't support this. So that's one of the big mistakes that a lot of organizations do. Another one was just misconfigurations. So adding multiple duplicate SPF records, not having DKIM aligned, that also is a mistake in my opinion. And lately, when I say lately, I mean after Google and now introduced these requirements, a lot of platforms are providing like DMARC records. Every single one of them is providing one. So as an admin, you're just going to copy and paste it into your DNS zone. But in fact, you already have 3 of them in there. You can only have one. So there's no need to add any other ones in there. So a common mistake was specifically in the last 1 year or 2 years or so, having multiple duplicate DMARC records, which is not valid.
Right. So it sounds like setting up, vetting these email platforms that you may be using for marketing purposes or for other business email is critical to making sure that they are aligning to all these standards. Like you mentioned, and one thing we really haven't talked about is how, the large email providers, your Microsofts, your Google, your Yahoos are now enforcing all these various records. So it's not only a fact of you as a business have to do it, but you've got to understand that the big guys, the big boys are enforcing it. So you've got to play by those rules. So I'm glad you mentioned, that, because I never thought about that actually, that you mentioned that the email provider, that platform that you're using needs to be able to support all these different records so that long-term, the deliverability of that system will work. So I'm glad you brought that up. Kind of another question I have is, and this is kind of more of your experience, in dealing with DMARC and these different email deliverability systems, whether it at Easy DMARC or in previous position. But can you share kind of a real world example where a company avoided a major issue by having these email authentication processes in place?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the biggest examples back in the day was PayPal. PayPal was one of the, if you think about it, it's a very easy target, right? If you can send emails out from PayPal and get them delivered to anyone, basically, they're just going to click on it, input credit card information, and that's it. Your information is gone. Your bank accounts, everything is gone. So what they did was they jumped on this very early on and adopted DMARC. And they were one of the initial supporters of it. And with doing so, they kind of stopped all of these spoofing or fraud emails and stuff like that to be sent from their own domain. One thing that I also want to mention here is, since this works on a domain level, so they secured PayPal.com, right? But there's also a lot of variations of PayPal. In a lot of cases, we see domains that have I in them be replaced with L's and stuff like that and be bought by someone else. Now they own that domain. They can do their own configuration and send emails configured properly with DMARC, SPF, and DKIM. So we call those lookalike domains. And as an organization, as a company, the IT departments need to be good at that as well. So you need to purchase every single lookalike domain that you can find out there. And for us, we have this mentality where we call this a park domain. It's a domain that you bought it to prevent anyone else from using it. You're not going to be sending emails out of it, but you want to park it. And by doing that, you need to add a DMARC record to it with the reject policy. So to block anyone from sending emails out of it, basically. And they were also good in this. If you look at it, PayPal, they have a lot of domains, different TLDs, lookalike domains. They got everything. We also do the same thing. We purchase everything that is Easy DMARC or lookalike to Easy DMARC and secure it. So that's one thing that I think is very, very. That's
a great advice right there. I've never really actually heard that. I know it just from just experiences that I've had. I can tell you horror stories of some people that have contacted us regarding what you just mentioned right now is spoofing a domain or buying a lookalike domain and using that to do some bad stuff. But that's an important thing. Buying, or acquiring as many of the lookalike domains to your domain would make sense. And I think with the advent of AI nowadays, you could pretty much draw up a quick list of lookalike domains and then go to your DNS and start purchasing them. Yeah, very fast. Yeah, instead of sitting there trying to figure out the combinations of my domain. No, if we figure out, AI can handle that very quickly. So I'm glad you brought that up. Moving into kind of another arena, it's something that's near and dear to my heart because I work with a lot of medical practices, dental practices, and HIPAA is a big thing. So how does email configuration tie into compliance with industry regulations like HIPAA, GDPR, some of the financial compliance models that are out there?
Yeah, that's a very good question because to keep this short, right, a lot of the goals that these compliance regulations they have aligns with what DMARC provides, whether it's like ensuring secure transmission, sensitive data protection, a lot of it, audits with the DMARC report. So it aligns with a lot of the goals that they have. Specifically, PCI DSS, I know, which is kind of like the banks, right? Credit card, anything that processes credit card information. On the latest version, DMARC was required, actually. Banks, specifically, banks are very, they have a lot of regulations around this, specifically DMARC, I mean, and have that enforced. Like the example that I gave, right? PayPal, it just ties into everything. You don't want people to be clicking here and there, giving out bank information and stuff like that. But generally, yes. So a lot of these regulations, it aligns with DMARC. So we're seeing a lot of updates, requirements, mentions about DMARC. For these.
Sounds great. Yeah, because I know that, with the various controls in all these different regulations, I know the email component of it is critical as far as one of the major controls, since we all know that email is that, pathway into some kind of potential breach. What impact does DMARC have on email durability? You covered it a little bit earlier, but can it actually help ensure that our emails don't end up in a spam folder?
Yeah. So it basically gives you a lot of control. So another perspective to look into this, just to not repeat myself over and over, is just from the mailbox side of things, right? Mailboxes, they have these algorithms for inbound emails. That any emails that are coming in, and they should be notifying their users that you got this email and etc. Before that happens, they built a lot of algorithms. And back in the day, they used to do it in a really not complete way. Do this, check that, check content, this, that. So what we're seeing nowadays is, since everything is getting standardized with these protocols, they're starting to base a lot of the stuff on these protocols as well. Just because, again, some of the things align with what they were doing without these protocols. So it's better to use them since they're standards, right? Nowadays, it's better to use them and make use of them to figure out how or what should be the reputation of these emails that this user is getting before sending it to spam, junk, this and that, and etc. So that's another perspective, but generally the protocols themselves are doing a lot. For anyone here that wants to know a little bit more about this, what the effect is, this is easy. This is public information. You guys can search up Google and Yahoo requirements for SPF, DKIM, DMARC, and see the impact, see the list of how many mentions Google or Yahoo or even Microsoft, which they did announce, have mentions of these protocols when it comes to reputation and domain in general.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because that kind of leads me into my next question that I was thinking in my head here is, for companies using platforms like Gmail or Microsoft, is DMARC still necessary?
Yes. So this is actually one of the things that a lot of people are also confused about. It doesn't matter what you're using, because if you think about it, DMARC is working for emails that are being sent outbound. And if every major, let's say every company, everyone does their part with the configuration, there's not going to be a lot of phishing or spam emails or anything like that. So it doesn't matter, Google, Yahoo, whatever you're using, you need to configure that to be compliant with these authentication protocols. And then also think of it like this. If we're talking about using Google or Microsoft, let's say inbound, there's not much you can do other than for Microsoft, like making sure that DMARC policies are respected for inbound emails. DMARC is taking care of all of that by itself. So you don't need to take action for inbound emails if you want to rely only on DMARC. But for big organizations out there, SaaS, banks, and stuff like that, I always also recommend for inbound emails to have some sort of an email security gateway, which is totally different, right? That's inbound, DMARC is outbound, but you also need that to make sure lookalike domains, even like domains, like actual domains that don't have DMARC implemented yet, and a bad actor is trying to impersonate it or send phishing emails out of it, you kind of want to do something about it to not be delivered to employees inbound internally. So you have that option as well.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. So I know that, the big guys are requiring a lot of this. So we want to make sure we educate our audience to these big platforms, Gmail, Microsoft, Yahoo, that they're implementing these records. And we want to make sure that we follow along with the big guys to make sure that we are not, going to fall into a trap later on of not being able to get emails delivered. Kind of my final question here is, and this is just kind of from a business standpoint, how can a business know if their domain is being abused or impersonated, and what can they do about it? What are your recommendations or your thoughts on this?
If we're talking about an organization that doesn't know about DMARC yet, they're kind of flying blind. They don't have any idea of, or any reports or anything. The only thing that they can do is they can hear internally that everyone's emails are going to spam because the whole domain reputation is down. But if we're talking for an organization, let's say, that have DMARC implemented, doesn't matter if it's none, quarantine, reject, you're enabling reports. And with this report that you're going to get, whether it's like aggregate reports or failure reports, those are the types of reporting that DMARC provides. You're going to see a lot of information in there. Let me give you an example, right? So actually 2 hours ago, I did a session with someone, an enterprise, and they said that a lot of phishing emails and stuff like that are going through to their inbound, to their internal employees, pretending to be from them, by the way. So they didn't have DMARC enforced, but what they saw was there was a specific platform vulnerability. I don't want to name it, but there was a vulnerability. And what we went through the reports together, and what we saw was a spike of 3,000 emails in a single hour, exploiting that vulnerability and sending emails inbound, pretending to be from the actual organization. If they had DMARC on reject, though, the policy, all those emails will be blocked, but they didn't. So everything got delivered. So back to your question, how do you actually detect this is you look through the reports and you're looking for anomalies, like a platform that is being used that should not be used. Or, the easy way is to use Easy DMARC, because we have a lot of alerts and stuff like that set up in place where you get notified instantly about cases like that. If we see a spike in a platform that should not be sending emails from your domain, you get an alert. And that's where you can see what DMARC is actually doing, right? The amount of emails, the attacks that are being blocked by DMARC.
Perfect. And I'm glad you mentioned, Easy DMARC, your company, basically the company you work for. We are a partner of Easy DMARC. That's the reason we were able to get this, this recording and this session going. For our audience, again, I want to make sure that we are here to educate people on DMARC, on DKIM email deliverability. I know it's a lot of information, even for me sometimes. Like I said, when I first started getting into this, it was way over my head. Yeah. But, over the years, I've gotten a good handle on it. Avi Hosep, this is what he does day to day. So he's very well versed in this. But we want to educate the customer. So what we're trying to do with this recording today is to spread the word. Basically, this is something that needs to get looked at. The first thing that I always try to tell people with these type of systems is you got to learn what you don't know. And the way to do that basically is to get a tool like Easy DMARC, and you can come through us, through IT Pros Management, management since we're a partner, and we can help you do an analysis of your current email system and see, are the records properly configured? What is not configured? What is the potential damage of what, your non-configuration can do to your reputation, to email deliverability, and then just basically proper business communication, because it will start impacting you as more and more organizations start enforcing this that you may be working with. And if you're not kind of falling in line with these protocols, you're going to be left behind, and you're going to be the one that's not getting the emails, or your emails are not being received. So we want to make sure that we educate you to the point where you understand it very clearly, and then we can make decisions on how we can help you enforce it. We use Easy DMARC internally, our company. Obviously, Easy DMARC uses their own product, but we want to basically be able to help customers understand that. On the screen here, you're going to see a QR code. And on that QR code, you can scan that and you can schedule a call with me directly. I can get on a call with you to discuss email deliverability, see how we can just maybe run a report and show you where you're currently at, and understand that this is where you're at, but you can do things, and we can use Easy DMARC, HostUp's company, to be able to help us get to where you need to be. Just scan that QR code, schedule a call with me to be a quick, 30, 45-minute call. We can run the scan together. I'll show you the report. It's very quick. We use Easy DMARC scanning tool. It scans the domain very quickly, produces a report, and then we can discuss what we find out in a report. It's very unbiased. It's very just, this is what it is, and that's it. And then we can move forward with that and start talking how we can help improve your deliverability or even your just reputation and security. HostUp, any final words of wisdom you could kind of give our audience before I let you get back to your day?
Do take security seriously because, like I said, even if it's like a one-time thing, when an incident happens, it's very hard to get back on your feet, especially for large organizations. So start with a monitoring policy for DMARC and read your reports, start the journey, get everything set up before this becomes an actual requirement, because by then it's gonna be a race to catch up with everything. So
yeah, that's great advice. Starting, and I like how you put it, start the journey, because it is a journey, everybody. This is not a turn a switch on, pop, 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 and it's all. No, you've got to plan it out, think about it. So it is a journey, but it's a journey you want to start today, and not, like Hopes have said, wait until some regulation says you have to do it, or some government agency says you have to do it. And then if you don't do it, then there's fines, and there's just all kind of crazy stuff that can happen if you don't fall in line. So HostUp, I thank you for your time. I appreciate Easy DMARC giving you this opportunity to join our show. I'll be reaching out to you, maybe asking some questions. Maybe we can get on a call and do some other stuff. But I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Have a great day. And to our audience, thank you for joining us today on Relax IT is Covered. Stay tuned to our podcast, our show. We will produce some more shows like this, where we really are here to educate business leaders, C-level executives, IT managers, IT directors that may be feeling overwhelmed with all the changes that are happening. Our show is here to kind of bring the expertise to you, as opposed to you having to go search for it. So thank you to Easy DMARC. Thank you, HostUp. Have a great day. Bye-bye, everybody.